Welcome back to Monster Tamer, a 2D Pokemon-like RPG created with Phaser 3. Previously, we started working on our dialogue component for our world scene. If you missed the previous videos, there'll be links in the video description to the source code up to this point, as well as the complete source code for this video. There'll also be a link to the previous videos if you'd like to catch up, so let's get started. Alright, so now with our cursor and our text, what we want to do is when we call our show dialog modal method, we want to go ahead and provide our messages that we want to display in our UI component. And then we'll want to go ahead and do our animation to animate our text, similar to what we did in our battle scene. So to go ahead and do that, let's come over to our code, and let's go ahead and update our show dialog modal method. And we're going to go ahead and expect a new parameter. It's going to be messages. And so for our messages, we're going to go ahead and store that on our messages to show property. And so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and make a copy of our messages array that's provided, and we'll store that. Then we're going to go ahead and call a new method, and we're going to do this show next message. And so for our show dialog modal, we'll just keep our existing code, and then show next message. This will have our logic for going ahead and playing the animation for our message that's in our queue. And so what we'll do is let's go ahead and add in that method. And so for this method, the first thing we'll do is we'll add a safety check to see if our message show queue is empty. And so we'll do this message to show length. And if it's equal to 0, we're not going to go ahead and do anything. So we'll go ahead and return. Otherwise, what we want to do is we can go ahead and copy some of our code from our battle menu here. And so what we'll do is we'll want to go ahead and reset our text to an empty string. So we'll go ahead and do this UI text. We'll set our text and then our alpha. And so for this, we don't want to go ahead and skip our animation. We'll want to have it. So we'll go ahead and paste this. Let's go ahead and add our import. And then we want to go ahead and grab our UI text game object. For our message, this is going to be our messages to show, and we'll use the shift method to go ahead and get the first element of our array and return it. So now we have our string we want to show. We'll go ahead and do 50 for our delay. And then in our callback, the only thing we need to do is update our text animation playing to say, hey, we're done. And what we'll do is after we call animate text, we'll go ahead and set that to true. And then that way we'll know if our animation's playing. Once it's done, then we'll go ahead and show it. All right, so now that we have our method, let's go ahead and jump back over to our world scene. And what we're going to go ahead and do is we're just going to use our sample text. So let's come to where we have our code and our handle player interaction. And so in our show dialog modal, we're going to go ahead and show our sample text. So if we hit the space key, we should see our sample text appear. It's animated. And if we hit the space key again, we hide our modal. All right, so now that we've validated that our text animation works, we need to go ahead and update our logic and our handle player interaction method here. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to know if our animation is currently playing. And if it is, we want to stop processing our input and wait for it to finish. Once our animation is done, then we'd allow the player to go ahead and interact with our UI component. And what we want to do is we need to know if there's more messages to show, because as we've seen some of our objects, we have multiple lines of messages. And so we want to hit the space key. We would display the next message, space key, next message until all of our messages are shown. And then that way we can have a full dialogue between our player and interactive objects or NPCs. Only once we've shown all our messages would we then go ahead and hide our modal if it's actually open. And so what we need to do is we actually need to add a few getters to our dialog UI class. And so what we'll do is we'll come up to the top of our class and let's add a new getter, and we'll do get is animation playing. And so for this, we'll return this is our text animation playing. And then we want to go ahead and return if there's more messages to show. So we'll do get more messages to show. And we're going to return this, our messages to show, dot length is greater than 0. then that way that'll also return a Boolean. So what we'll do is we'll just add in our types really quick. We'll jump back to our world scene, and now we can go ahead and update our handle player interaction method. And so what we're going to go ahead and do is first, we're going to go ahead and check to see if our animation is playing. So we're just going to copy this here. And if our dialog UI is animation playing, we're going to go ahead and return. If our animation's not playing, what we want to know is if our modal is currently visible. If it's currently visible and we do not have more messages to show, so we'll do dialog UI, more message to show, then we want to go ahead and hide our modal, because now we're done with all of our text. Then what we'd want to do is we need to check if there is more messages to show. So if it's visible and we do have messages that we need to show to the player, we don't want to call hide dialog modal. We're actually going to call our public show next message. And then that way it'll grab the next message in our queue and play it. And then we would go ahead and return. And then what we actually want to do with our show dialog model here is we don't want to call it directly there. Instead, we want to come down to where we were logging our text before. And so instead of logging our text, we're going to call our dialog UI show dialog modal, and we're going to call our text to show. And let's go ahead and get rid of our console log. All right, so with those changes, we should now be able to go ahead and test our code. So if we come back to our scene, let's go to one of our signs. All right, if we go ahead and face our sign, hit the space key, we see the message that's tied to the sign. So we have our trainer tips. We want to avoid battles, stay away from grassy areas. If we hit the space key, it clears out. Now, if we step away and we hit the space key, our dialog component does not show up. Likewise, if we move to another sign and we hit our space key, now our component is down at the bottom of our screen like we expect, and we have the appropriate text where we can't read our sign. So now if we come to the front of it, what we should be able to do is get our new text. So for poison, use antidote. And if we just go ahead and test one of our other signs, we should see our components at the bottom of our screen, and don't leave home without a map. All right, so now that we have all of our code working, we're just going to go ahead and add a few types real quick to our class. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to our show dialog modal method, and what we want to do for our types is we're going to go ahead and define our parameter of messages. It'll be a string array, and we return void. Then for our show next message, this is also going to return void. Same thing with hide our dialog modal, we'll return void. And then likewise for our create player input cursor, we'll return void. All right, so one last thing we need to do is we need to add some logic for handling when the player is actually interacting with our dialog component and prevent the player from moving around our screen. So currently, after our UI component is open, if the user presses one of our arrow keys, they start moving around our scene. And what happens is we get this really odd effect here. And so to go ahead and address this, what we're going to go ahead and do is in our world scene, we're going to go ahead and add a new method. And so what we'll do is we'll come to the bottom of our class, and we're going to go ahead and call this is player input locked. And inside this method, we're just going to go ahead and return this, our dialog UI, and is visible. And so what we're doing here is we're creating a method we'll be able to reuse later for other things as well. Such as if the user's in the middle of a cutscene, we want to let the player move around the scene. If they're in their menu, we want to move them around. We only want to move around in that menu, and a few other things like that. So what we're going to do is with our new method, we're going to go ahead and come back up to our update method, so where we handle our player input. And so right when we do our check to see if there's no direction selected, we're just going to add an and statement. So and if our player input is not locked, then we'll go ahead and process our input. So now what should happen is if we come back to our scene, if we go to one of our signs, if we go ahead and open up our menu, now if we press one of our arrow keys, our player stays facing our sign and they don't move around our scene. And then our input's unlocked once we close our dialog. All right, with that actually brings this video to an end. In our next video, we're going to go ahead and work on using our data from Tile to go ahead and create our NPC characters. And so what we're going to do is we'll take our character class and we'll create a new child instance for NPCs, and we'll start placing our NPCs in our world. So as a reminder, there's a link in the description of the video to the complete source code for this video. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video in the series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please see the links on your screen now.